Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Julie here from StoryADay, and I am here this week to talk to you about some other things that I've been discovering working through the One Story September Challenge with the current group of people going through it. Last week we were talking about how characters react to various stimuli, and so I was sharing the things I've learned in my study of the psychology of the human being, the human creature. And one of the things that's really striking is that we are not as evolved as we think we are. So if you've been struggling, if you're interested in how to write better characters, I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And I'm also going to talk about how we can use that knowledge to help ourselves to escape from the prison of imposter syndrome or procrastination or lack of motivation or starting things and not finishing them. All of these complaints that I hear from people every time I put out a survey that asks you what you're struggling with right now, or anytime basically I talk to writers or be a writer myself. So first, let's talk about characters, because it's easier to talk about other people, especially non-existent people, than it is to examine our deep, dark inner selves. Here's how humans operate. When something happens, we react instinctively. We react chemically, actually. Our body floods itself with whatever chemicals in our history of human existence has taught us is important. This is what we're talking about when we say we have the fight or flight response, or how, you know, your body thinks it's going to, if you're stressed, it's like in olden days when you used to think you were going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. Actually, humans are a lot older than saber-toothed tigers. And so you've heard those things so many times that they just kind of wash over you now. But I want you to think about the fact that we react instinctively, and our bodies flood us with the chemicals that it thinks we're going to need before any rational thought has time to form in our brains. That's how your characters react. And because we are writing something that is potentially quite intimate with our characters, we can hop into their heads, we can hop into their bodies at any point, and we should be sharing that stuff with the reader. The reader doesn't really want to know just what's happening on the external. They want to know what's happening inside the character. We all consume a lot of television and movies, I'm going to assume. And that, in the hands of a really good actor and a really good director, sometimes you get some of that inner journey. You see a range of emotions flicker over the protagonist's face before they do the right thing. What's happening and what's happened with that actor and director is probably lots and lots of conversations about exactly how the character wants to react and what they're doing to suppress that initial desire, and whether they're going to give in to that initial desire. And the fact is, that's what's happening in every person all the time when something happens. We have this instinctive reaction, and then we have the conditioned response. And the conditioned response, the first response that we consciously have, even subconsciously, is the conditioned response from when you were a kid, and what the people who raised you and the people around you who mattered to you taught you was an acceptable solution to a situation or reaction to a situation. So if you grew up in a house that was very ebullient, whether that's for good or ill, if your character comes from, say, an Italian-American family where everybody argues and shouts and then it all blows over in a few minutes, this is, I am led to believe, then that's going to be how they think it's okay to react. And that's going to be the first reaction they reach for, beyond the fight or flight reaction. The urge to punch someone is fairly deeply buried when somebody crosses you. The urge to, like, if they come at you physically, the urge to come back at them physically is fairly deeply in us instinctually. Your childhood will have taught you whether or not it's acceptable to let that instinct go, or whether you need to, like, sit on your hands. Beyond that, as your character lives through life and goes outside the world of their family, their childhood environment, they're going to be in other environments where they will learn other ways of being, and they will learn other societal norms. When you go to school, it's very much not okay to punch someone when you're in the classroom, even though in certain eras and certain places it might still have been fine to scrap on the playground. So you have to learn, as a human being, to suppress instincts in layers. As you become, say this character who we've talked about comes from a very voluble, very volatile family, where it might have been okay to punch your brother, and then they go to school and discover it's okay to punch them, but only on the playground when nobody's looking, certainly not in front of a teacher, and certainly not in the classroom. Then they grow up and they become a lawyer for people who may still do the punching, but the lawyer themselves has to have these layers of civility and refinement, which they drape over everything that they learned. And so if you're writing this character, they're probably not punching anyone anymore, except in very extreme circumstances in very dark alleys. Which means that in a situation of high stress, when someone comes at your lawyer verbally, they are going to react with that primal urge to punch. The little kid in them is going to want to punch. The kid who went through school and who's learned to suppress that urge until nobody's looking might kick in. And then the kid who went through law school and learned to suppress all of that and come at them verbally is going to kick in, maybe on their best day, in the best of circumstances. So that's a lot of emotion. Those are a lot of stages that your character is going to go through in an instant. That's how the human mind, brain, nervous system works. If you're not showing us any of that, how are we supposed to know what your character is going through? If they just quirk an eyebrow or smirk, what does that tell us about what's actually happening inside your character? You've got like a 5-minute slow-mo sequence that you could be running through. You've got all the off-ramps on that journey. Your character can go all the way to the right civilized response and come back with a witty rejoinder, or they can take an earlier off-ramp and they can snarl, or they can lash out, or they can, have some physical reaction that shows them wanting to go at the other person and repressing it because, school. Or you can let rip and you can let them have their primitive reaction, not even the one in the family where somebody would have stepped in and said, okay kids, let's break it up now. You could let them go even further. You have all of those things to go through emotionally inside your character before you even start thinking about how to show that on the outside and how far they're going to go. So we go from a very primitive response to a conditioned response that can be hard to get over, to the civilized response that we have layered on as adults that makes the actions that we think are civilized and acceptable. Part of the journey throughout a story for your character, part of the internal journey of any character, is probably going to always be a balance between what society will accept as civilized and what your character really wants to do. It's probably a journey about, or a balancing act about them overcoming their instincts and deciding how far to go towards what society wants and what feels good in the moment. And then, of course, you get to explore things like the conditioning that your character has laid over themselves, both by their family and their school and their environment, all of these things, all of this conditioning that has happened to them, along with the things that they have decided to take on in order to fit into the world they're in. Some of that stuff may need to be stripped away. You think about a romantic partner who's experiencing coercive control. They have learned all these layers of conditioning that have kept them safe, and some of that stuff they shouldn't have. And they're going to have to strip that stuff away. And it's always going to be a fight between the instinct, the conditioning, the intellectual decision about what's acceptable, and then perhaps a further intellectual decision about what's acceptable now, in this moment, for me, unlearning the stuff that I learned before. Humans are complicated, and it happens in the fraction of a second. What can you put into your writing to show us what your character's going through? Not all the time, just some of the time. When are the good moments to show that stuff? Is your character always going to react in the civilized, acceptable manner? Is that always the right thing for them to do? How are they going to feel if they let go and they get a bit more primitive? How are they going to feel if they stay civilized when they shouldn't have? Which brings me to you, the writer. As you go through your writing process, you too are human. You too are dealing with all of these reactions to your writing. It seems ridiculous, but it's not an intellectual thing. When you're writing and things get hard, this is what you go through. You go through an instinctive reaction, you go through your conditioned reaction, and then maybe, if you're paying attention, you get to the intellectual reaction where you say, I know this feels a little uncomfortable at the moment, but I'm going to be cool about it, and I'm going to look at my work dispassionately, and I'm going to decide where it's working and where it's not working. Now, on the journey from the, this feels hard, to, no, I'm going to be dispassionate and sensible, and I'm going to work on this like a scientist and tweak my writing. On the journey from one to the other, you're going down a path that I can't possibly know, because I don't know whose voices are in your head. I don't know what you were conditioned to believe was acceptable. I don't know what you've been through in your life. But I do know that that stuff is all in there. And when people say to me I'm suffering from imposter syndrome, even though I know they are beautiful writers, when people tell me they can't finish things, even though I'm dying to know what happens at the end of their story, I know there's something going on in that middle area. In that you were conditioned to believe certain things area. Maybe you were conditioned to believe that you shouldn't take this much time away from your family to write. Maybe. Is that acceptable? Is that appropriate for this moment in your life? Is that lesson that you learned when you had a tiny baby who really did need you to be there every second of the day appropriate now that your children are adults, or now that your parents are gone, or now that there's other younger people in your community who can do some of the things you used to do? Does the fact that you're a good girl and you never swear mean that your characters can't curse? And if it makes you uncomfortable, how are you going to deal with that? If you were the smart kid at school and everything came easily to you and you were able to dodge the classes that were hard, I'm not saying that I got out of gym by saying I had singing lessons, but I'm not saying that. If you were able to dodge the difficult things early in life, or a lot of stuff came easily to you, when things get hard, do you have the conditioning that says hard things are to be avoided? Or do you have the ability to push through that and get your intellect involved and say, yeah, I'm not very good at this, But that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm not good at living. It doesn't mean I'm worthless. It means I didn't write this correctly and I don't quite know what's wrong with it, and I might have to ask for help, and that might be uncomfortable. We have to work through our instinctive reactions, just like our characters do. We have to work through our conditioned responses and ask whether those are still appropriate. And then we have to look at our intellectual rationalizing of our actions and ask if that's actually appropriate. Is it appropriate to say, oh, well, I'm not very good at writing novels, therefore I should just not? Or is it acceptable to say, oh, well, I'm not very good at writing novels, I need to figure out why and what's tripping me up, because this is quite a complex thing, and I bet I'm not good at writing novels. I bet I don't have a strong sense of what's actually supposed to be happening in the scenes in the middle after the inciting incident and before the climax. And maybe I need to go and study some story structure from someone who really gets this and speaks about it in a way that I can relate to. I know, writing's fun, right? Writing's a thing you enjoyed. It's supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, it wouldn't be interesting. You may have to do some work on the bit between your reaction and the intellectual response you actually want and the outcome that matters to you. And this all happened because I promised to share with a bunch of people what I had learned in my writing practice and study about the difference between show and tell. That writing advice that says, you should show, not tell. A, not always true, and B, wow, is there a lot to explore in there. So we've spent this month in the One Story Challenge exploring show, don't tell. And in the meantime, I got to delve into human psychology and human physiology in order to allow all of us to write better characters who react more realistically and who have depth. Even in short stories, you can do this stuff so easily, not easily, you can do this stuff so quickly and with so few words that you can do this in a short story if you know what you're trying to achieve. So I delved into human psychology, physiology, and expectations. I ended up delving into personal development, all because I wanted to write and help some other people write stories that were more satisfying to other people. There's nothing wrong with wanting to please people, especially if you can use it to keep learning. This life, I think, is a lifelong learning project, and writing is demanding because it demands that we look at the human condition. So simply looking at a technique like show, don't tell has allowed me to go so deep this month. And it's allowed me to develop not just my craft, but as a writer with a writing practice. It's allowed me to examine why I sometimes resist writing, even though I love it. It's allowed me to examine whether or not the polite society rules I was raised with are serving me, whether I need to be quite that polite, or whether it would be better for me as a human being in this one life to react differently to some things. It's allowed me to examine whose voices are in my head and whether they're worth listening to. It's allowed me to build confidence. And I think it's doing the same for the people in the One Story Challenge. Never think that your writing is a waste of time. Your writing is a personal development project that trickles out into that filters out into the world around you, to all the people that you come in contact with. Working on a skill or a craft piece or a story or a technique is never a waste of time. It will teach you so much about people, about your writing, and about yourself. So, I commend you for being a writer and for doing the hard work, as well as the easy work. And if you're not always finding it easy or having it fun, finding it easy or having it feel like fun, I heard an athlete talking about this recently, and they said that their coach had told them it's the rule of thirds. A third of the time, it's going to feel easy and joyous and you're in the flow and it's going to feel great. A third of the time, it's going to feel like work. And a third of the time, no matter what you do, it's going to feel like you're failing because you just can't you can't perform at your best level. You can't go faster enough. You can't meet the times that you wanted to meet. You just can't do it on those days. But as long as that's a third and a third of the time, you're loving it, and the middle third is work, that's about right. And I found that very encouraging. Worthwhile things aren't always easy. We can look at ways of making them more easy. We don't need to make them harder. But there are going to be days where it's just not happening. It's just not coming. But those days are not wasted. Those days are building strength, building persistence, building grit, building patience. And for a writer, they're probably you absorbing experiences, noodling things in the back of your mind where you're not thinking about them, watching the world, watching people, seeing how they really work. You don't need to be turning out 2,000 words a day to be a writer. So I encourage you to think about deepening your characters' reactions, letting the reader pause and go through that process with them occasionally. And I also encourage you to pause and examine your own reactions when you come up against something that's a little hard. In part, so you can replicate it on the page, but in part, so that you can get to the intellectual analysis part of it and figure out if there's anything you need to change and what that might be. And there's no rush, because this is a lifetime project. That's what I have for you this week. If you'd like to join the One Story Challenge, you can join it at any time by coming to StoryADay.org/one-story-sign-up. Keep writing. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at StoryADay.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week and, of course, keep writing.